kicked off. We have a couple of people just coming in now, but we'll start. So my name is Valerie Lockhart, and I am your moderator this evening for our meetup. I'm new to WeCo and new to this group, but I am very passionate about accessibility and very happy to be here moderating this really good talk that we're going to have tonight. We will be discussing accessible inclusion and cognitive disabilities this evening. And we have two presenters with us, Lynn Wehrman, who is the founder and president of WeCo, and Lynda Little, and they will both be discussing their experiences as people living with cognitive disabilities in the workplace. So a couple of housekeeping things before we get to that is just we want to thank our sponsors. So we have United Health Group and WeCo as our two sponsors right now. And we will be, I'm going to be managing more of the meetup coming up. So if anybody has any events this fall that they want to share with the group, you can go ahead and message us on Meetup, or you can email me at val@theweco.com. And I'll make sure that we get things shared out on the Meetup group for everybody to find out. Our next meetup is going to be November 28th. Which will be the Monday after Thanksgiving. And it's going to be Depuzzling Digital Accessibility. And it'll be Marcia Schwanke of the Southwest ADA Center presenting. And I don't know exactly where I'm talking to her coming up here tomorrow to find out more about what her presentation entails. But I know it'll be some tips and tricks and things that you can share out with other people as well to make digital accessibility more understandable. And then sometime, I'm assuming before the end of the year, we'll be sending out a survey to kind of get your opinions on things that you'd like to see coming up with the meetup, or topics you'd like covered, that kind of thing. So watch your inboxes for that. And I kind of already did this part, so jumped the gun a little bit on that. But I will hand things over to Lynn Wehrman. She's going to start us out. We'll do, her and Lynda will be presenting some information to us. And then afterwards, we'll have a Q&A and more of a discussion. So if you do have questions or anything in the meantime, you feel free to either put them in the chat, or if you do want to speak out, we just ask that you say your name and kind of announce yourself before you speak, so we know who's talking. But other than that, we'll probably keep everybody on mute until you need to talk, and we'll hand things over to Lynn.
Thanks, Val. And for the record, I just kind of threw her in the water on this. Val and I had a very, very busy last week. We were on a disability in equivalent of Shark Tank, and we also did a class on Twin City Startup Week. And Val, I'm handing over admitting people to you now. Okay, we're tag teaming on this. So I did not allow her to see these slides in advance, so she was punting. Very well done, Val. Okay. So tonight, I'm really excited about this topic because at WeCo, we talk a lot about how important it is to accommodate digitally the needs of people who live with cognitive disabilities. But I think that a lot of times, until you delve into it and really work with it, it's hard to understand what that is. So we're hoping that tonight we can give a little bit more definition and clarity to you. This is going to be in part an instructional portion where we give you some background information, and we're going to show a short video. But what we really want to do is foster a discussion and let you know that there is no question that you cannot ask. Trust me, at WeCo, we get them all, and that's why we're here. So this is the time to ask those questions. So I'm just going to introduce a little bit to set up the framework of our discussion. The tricky thing about cognitive disabilities is that they're very, very easy to discount. They're also very, very easy. I'm sorry, are we recording this, Val?
In progress.
All right. So I'll just start over on this part, okay? So the tricky thing about cognitive disabilities is that it's really easy to discount them because you can't see them. For most people, they're not visually apparent. And it's also easy, well, we find that people assume this about all types of disabilities, that they're static, that you have a disability and it doesn't change. Well, the thing about cognitive disabilities is that they're active in different degrees. I often say that there are some days that I'm more disabled than others. And it shifts a great deal for many of us who live with cognitive disabilities. And the other thing that's important to note is that no one wants to talk about them. And probably my favorite story that I tell, you may have heard me tell this story if you've listened to any of my talks, was when I was working for the Minnesota Department of Transportation, and I was asked to serve on an employee committee of representing employees who lived with disabilities. And I knew someone who was part of that committee who worked for the Department of Employment. And he begged me to be on this committee because he said, we cannot find anybody to represent anyone with cognitive disabilities. And well, if you know anything about my story, I have pretty much been out about my disability my whole life because I lived in a small town and there was no hiding my mental illness hospitalizations from anyone. So I didn't really have a lot of choice. I was out from the time I was a kid. So I really wasn't that shy about it. So I remember going to the first meeting and I'm in this conference room with different employees. And there's an employee who says, hi, my name is so-and-so, and I'm blind, and talked about what that experience was. And someone else, hi, I'm so-and-so, and I'm deaf, talked about that experience. Hi, I'm so-and-so, and I live with a motor skill disability. I'm in a wheelchair, talked about that. And the time came to me and I said, hi, I'm Lynn, and I live with mental illness. Every person, even the blind person, looked down and would not look at me. And it was just a really powerful experience to me, partly because I was in this odd world where I and a lot of the members of my extended family had dealt with mental illness, and I had sisters with epilepsy, and I was in that family and pretty used to talking about it. And I went, wow, people are ashamed of my mental illness. And it's when it wasn't so much hurtful as it was just astounding. So nobody really wants to talk about cognitive disabilities, and some of them are more taboo than others. So that's kind of the tricky part about when you're considering the needs of people who live with cognitive disabilities, you're really up against those three things. And it's so understand that as you go back to staff groups and working groups, that's why this isn't readily seen as a thing you need to do. So I think that's an important consideration. So the other thing is getting comfortable with our discomfort. Why do we feel we need to hide cognitive disabilities? So I'm going to tell you another story. And this one actually is more recent. This is when I was working with a staff team at WeCo. And one of the things that I do with my mental illness is that I work very, very hard to make it seem normal. And I was very fortunate to have an amazing psychiatrist in the Park Nicollet system. His name was Dr. Larson, who told me a long time ago, your depression is no different than someone else's broken leg. And so in the workplace, I work to being open about the fact that I live with this disability and I need to deal with it. So I was sitting at a table with a couple of our staff, and I said, I have a therapy appointment next week. I can't make it to that meeting. And they laughed. And I realized that they laughed because they were uncomfortable. And I thought that was interesting. And for a while, I felt bad because I felt like I had put them in an uncomfortable position by talking about my disability. So I went to one of our advisory board members, who is our HR support. She's a pretty amazing woman. She lives with low vision, and she has did reasonable accommodation for the Department of Defense for about 30 years. So she's a wonderful resource for us. So I called her and I said, I had this reaction from my staff team and I don't know how to deal with it. And this is a woman who is a woman of color, who is low vision, who's worked in accommodation, and her first reaction was, why would you bring that up to your staff? And I felt like I had been hit in the stomach. Okay, so this is, guys, this is what I'm saying, is this is not just people who don't live with disabilities. This is not people that are, isolated and have never been around people with disabilities. This is everyone is really, really uncomfortable with cognitive disabilities or in talking about some types of cognitive disabilities. So I think that it's amazing, especially now that we live in this woke culture where everyone wants to be inclusive. We are still, and I in particular, I'm still running into people that are, for instance, did a corporate training a couple of months ago where I was open about my mental illness, and some of the feedback comments were that I had disclosed too much. So, I think that one thing that we have to come to terms with when we think about people with cognitive disabilities and meeting their needs digitally is that we may feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with feeling uncomfortable because something used to be something that we never talked about. So I just thought that it would be good for us to start out with that framework before we move into a little bit more of the meat of the presentation and open up for discussion. So Val did introduce me, but I wanted to introduce you a little bit more to me so you get to know me a little bit better. I am the founder and president of WeCo Accessibility Services. My career was really interesting. My young career life was largely sales, moved into communication, and then I moved into federal program coordination for the state of Minnesota. And it was while I was there that I realized that I had a calling for digital accessibility and for bringing experts who lived with disabilities to the table, and that's how we started the company. But my background medically is that I was born with clinical depression. I know I was, because I can remember being a tiny, tiny little girl and dealing with depression, and actually thinking that everybody must feel this way, and was kind of stunned when I realized that not everybody did. But the difficult thing about my childhood, I grew up in a very abusive home environment, physically and mentally, and did not realize until I was in my early 30s that I had a dual diagnosis, and the second diagnosis was called borderline personality disorder traits. And what that means is that if you are someone who has grown up essentially in a war zone, you learn an entire set of coping mechanisms to deal with being in that war zone. And then when you got out of the war zone, like into life where People are not, you're not dealing with physical confrontation every day. You're not dealing with emotional abuse every day, but you retain those coping mechanisms. They don't work so well. And so I was a brilliant student. I was an overachiever in high school and college, but things were always falling apart. And I was always at odds with people because I had these old coping mechanisms. And so I was very, very fortunate in my 30s that the right therapist and psychiatrist figured out what I probably had after a myriad of misdiagnosis and sent me to a treatment that changed my life, dialectical behavioral therapy. And it worked. So at least I think it did. I mean, my staff maybe thinks differently, but it really has. It changed my life, and it enabled me to move on with my life and have a career that I could not have before when I did not understand my diagnosis. So that's what I'm speaking to you from. I also had childhood epilepsy and outgrew it. And I have 4 sisters, one of whom still is epileptic, but the 4 of us outgrew, or 3 of us outgrew epilepsy. So that is me. And now I'm going to turn this over to Lynda Little, who is our operations specialist here at WeCo. Take over.
Hi guys, thanks so much, Lynn. Hi, like Lynn said, my name is Lynda Little.
Sorry.
And I am the operations assistant here at WeCo. I also suffer from, I have bipolar disorder type 2. And I also have another commingled disorder with anxiety disorder that I struggle with on a daily. A little background about me: before I came to WeCo, I worked in the legal field in Chicago for a very not so nice lawyer that pushed me to the brink of almost a breaking point. I had a couple of meltdowns looking back at them now, knowing what they were in the light of my diagnosis. I had a couple manic episodes, a couple depressive episodes, because with bipolar, you can get both. You have either extreme runs of deep depression or high mania, which can be like euphoric for some people. For me, it triggers my anxiety disorder and doesn't really work for me. But anyways, like I said, and coming to WeCo has definitely helped me be more open and feel more confident about saying I have a cognitive disability and stepping up and stepping to the plate and saying, hey, I need this. Is it possible? And just so it can be done. You can work a normal job and still have a cognitive disability. You just need some little help along the way sometimes. So I'm very grateful for WeCo for accepting my issues and being able to work with them. So people who live with cognitive disabilities may encounter a wide array of issues when using computers and the internet. Keep in mind that cognitive disabilities can include people living with issues that make reading difficult, such as dyslexia and depression, cause the user to be easily distracted, such as attention deficit disorder, can trigger seizures, and such with users who live with epilepsy and disabilities that make it difficult for users to comprehend technical or wordy content, such as people who live with a traumatic brain injury or an intellectual disability. They can also have a cognitive disability that isn't always commonly recognized, like the ones Lynn and I have, which is bipolar 2 and borderline personality disorder traits. Because it's not always easy to know when someone has a cognitive related disability, it is important to be aware of the need to digitally accommodate for this type of disability, or for disability type, is just as important as accommodating those that are parent. Bright Hub Education defines the experience of living with a cognitive disabilities as, you may experience problems remembering, difficulty processing emergencies, difficulty processing information, and problems accessing information. I know for me personally, when my mania is triggered, I have a hard time remembering fine details of things.
Are you ready to move on, Lynda? I'm sorry, I've been just zipping through these.
No problem.
Okay.
And then this is a video we want to show you that deals with a man named David and how he uses technology to help him manage his cognitive disability.
And I think what was interesting about this is that Lynda and I met on Friday to prepare for this. And when we met, this is one of the things she talked about. Everything that's in this video was stuff that she was talking to me about what she relies upon technology for to manage her cognitive disability. And to a certain extent, so do I, but Lynda was really, really pretty specific about this. So when I found this video, I thought this would be a great thing for us to show you. So the link to the video is also in the chat if this does not come through for you. Sorry.
I served in the United States Air Force as a crew chief on F-16 Fighting Falcon. Did a lot of ground crew services as far as launch and recovery of aircraft. To handle those stressors that I faced overseas and stateside, my thoughts were to purchase a motorcycle. Ended up giving myself a severe traumatic brain injury. A lot of the things I struggle with now are memory. Earlier on, I was struggling through some of the injuries and disabilities I obtained from my accident. I found it very necessary to explore all the avenues of coping strategies that I could. I use the calendar a lot. I text message myself a lot. If I need to remember that my laundry is in the washer and needs to go to the dryer, I'll put the timer on for that. There are times that I need to remember certain things, and I'll take a picture of it to remind myself. Come back on later. If need be, I'll set an alarm that suggests with a name that I need to look at a certain picture. I feel very normal using applications on my mobile device, such as Google Keep. It's very helpful. Google Keep seems very purposeful, especially for a memory strategy, because it encompasses a lot of those different apps that I was using, and instead of having to use all these different separate apps, it's all in one. Things have gotten tremendously better from what they were before. For the longest time, I stuck to a flip phone until I had my accident. That really just forced me into getting myself a smartphone, which was good. Embracing the new technologies.
Okay. So that is, oh, excuse me a minute. So that obviously the technology was a little dated, but the basic information about how this gentleman depends upon digital. And I think that that's a really important piece when you start thinking about how you design the layout of a website, how someone with a cognitive disability interacts with a form or a search mechanism on your website. Did you want to share anything else about that, Lynda?
I was just saying, I really agree with that. I use all those tools in the same way just to help me cope with my things as well. So I think it's a really good video, and it's a really good thing to know. Like, it's important to think about these things and how people rely on them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and a hallmark of the types of cognitive disabilities, certainly that Lynda and I live with, but also that, I mean, other people live with as well. I think about my sister who still has epilepsy and is on some pretty strong anti-seizure meds. Memory loss is a big part for the three of us. And those are very radically different disabilities. But, you know, being able to retain small detail, I think can get really, really tough when our disabilities are active or we're under pressure. Wouldn't you agree, Lynda?
Wholeheartedly.
Okay. Is there anything else that you identified with in that specifically?
Definitely like setting an alarm for like if you have to change your washer to the dryer. I do that all the time. But I also use the schedule for like work and things like that. Like if I have a meeting, I put it in the calendar in my phone and set up a reminder for it so it comes up before, so I'm not like, whoa, gotta go to a meeting. So I think it just shows, you know, the usefulness of all these little slightly not very big apps, but they work in a big way.
So one thing that came up for me in our discussion and listening to David and you is that you wanted that warning before a meeting. So let's say you don't have that warning and you forgot about a meeting. How could that activate your disability? Like if you came across—
It triggers me into a panic attack because of my anxiety disorder, where I feel like I'm hyperventilating, can't breathe, like I'm literally gonna die. Or it can trigger mania that will also trigger anxiety for me, but the mania kind of feels like, oh, I can get it done, let me just do it. And then I rush through things and miss a lot of details that way.
Okay, so it gives you a feeling. For people that aren't experienced, haven't been around someone who has mania, it gives you a sense of overconfidence that does not reflect reality, and it can get you into trouble.
It does.
Okay, all right. So we're going to go through a few more points and then we'll open up for discussion here. This is just a list that Lynda and I came up with, and keep in mind that Lynda and I are not WeCo accessibility specialists, but we do have WeCo accessibility specialists on the line we can pull some information from. But these were things that we came up with together about what works for us and what doesn't work. Content, making it to the point, keeping it minimal. I actually updated the slide, Val. I don't think it took. So I'm going to read a little bit differently than what this slide was initially our thoughts, but I refined it a bit. Any website that has tons and tons of detail, you know, lots and lots of writing on a page, is going to be very overwhelming to people with a wide variety of cognitive disabilities. And I know that some people have heard me tell the story about when I was starting the company, and I was working with one of my early mentors, Janet Peters from the Great Lakes ADA Center. She and I went out to drinks with a teacher friend of hers from Anoka Hennepin Community College. And the teacher said, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about because I have a student who has attention deficit disorder and she can't go on Moodle to get her assignments because she winds up in tears. So I get her assignments for her off of the Moodle site. So having too much detail can actually bar access for some individuals. Navigation really needs to be intuitive. And I think that it's really important if you're building something to apply the concepts of information architecture. And if it's not something that you understand, you need to find someone who does. We're building a new website right now, and we've been very pleased with our web developer because he has very sound information architecture principles and walks us through them. But making sure that there is a logical flow to how that information is placed in the site really helps. And both Lynda and I really believe that the search box is a really, really essential part to how we find things on websites. If my depression is really active, I get very confused, and my staff know me well enough now. I mean, I see Maureen Pranghofer is here, and Maureen will always say things like, yeah, you get really confused when you get depressed. You know, she'll know that. And that for me, the things that I could find on a website yesterday, I cannot find the next day. So using that search box and having that queued up correctly is really important. Images, keeping them simple, relevant, and not overwhelming. If images move, give the individual control to start and stop them. And then forms, autofill features can be really, really great for those of us who live with cognitive disabilities, and timed forms can be aggravating. Just some best practices that we want to spotlight is, again, I talked about information architecture is an accessibility tool. And I don't think that we can state that strongly enough. You may think that you know how to put a website together, but trust me, because I mean, I used to be that person that did that, okay? But having hired somebody that really understands information architecture, it really makes a big difference. Having a lot of white space on a page actually makes my blood pressure go down. If I encounter, I don't know, Lynda, do you feel that way when you walk into a website and it's like, too much?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I'm already tense. So
Lynn, there's a question in the audience wondering if you have an example that you could show of an overwhelming website.
I can pull one up, but we're going to show you a good one in a minute.
Okay, perfect.
So, but yeah, I can manage to find an overwhelming one for you too. So, and then search boxes need to work well. The other thing that I want to emphasize is that images really matter. Images can really convey emotion, convey what a page does, and that personally can be very helpful to me if I'm having difficulty reading. So when my depression is really active, I can read a sentence over and over and over and not understand it. So sometimes having like a simple icon, having a an image on a page can do a lot to help comprehension. Do you have anything you wanted to add here, Lynda?
I think you really hit the ball on all of it. I just really want to agree with your whole thing about white space and search boxes. I think they're the really great tools. And I think you really just need to just start thinking about that when you're developing a website. And someone in the comments even says images can overload people with autism as well.
Mm-hmm. So
it's wide spectrum.
I think that this is the disability classification that is the toughest to nail, because it is such a balance. It really is. But I think that if there's any overall theme, it's simplicity is best. Don't overwhelm, not too much detail, not too many pictures, and probably not a whole lot of moving graphics, definitely no moving graphics without controls. This is, and if you've been in any of my classes, you know I love WebAIM. We're huge WebAIM junkies. We call them about stuff all the time, which, by the way, you pay for with your federal tax dollars. So they work for you. So they're there to help you. Okay. But this website is awesome. It's, from my viewpoint, it's got lovely white space. I love what they did with the search box. And I like the fact that they put primary points below the search box that are common for what people come to them for. But I really, really like the tile format that they're showing for their primary features. tiles, tablets with tiles were actually designed for students with cognitive disabilities before Microsoft Surface incorporated it into their tablets. So that is why you're seeing a lot of that design, I believe, show up on websites. Is there anything else that anybody in the audience can pick out about what might be cool about this website for someone with a cognitive disability? Sorry, it's going to be visual users only. You can text it in if you don't want to speak up.
I'm sorry, Lynn, this is Charles. Can you repeat the question? Did you ask if there's something on this screen that would be overwhelming?
Yes, on this screenshot of the WebAIM website, what else are they doing well that would probably work well for someone with a cognitive disability? Sorry. Look at the navigation bar.
Samantha said soft colors keep the site from being overwhelming.
Yeah, that's definitely good points. I love this navigation bar. Services, articles, resources, projects, community. It's a single word. It's better than our website's navigation bar. It's awesome. It's just to the point, succinct, very basic. Okay. So at this point, I think we're just going to open the floor up for discussion. Keep in mind that Lynda and I are really talking from our experience, but we're happy if anybody on the call wants to speak to your experience. We'd love to share that perspective with everybody tonight.
And we did have one question come up a little bit earlier in the chat, but it was to be held till this time. So okay, maybe we can start there.
Sure.
They're wondering what your thoughts are about using alternative style sheets for dyslexia and friendly fonts, or dyslexic friendly fonts, sorry. Style sheets for dyslexic friendly fonts and then alternative layouts.
That's an interesting one, and it's actually something that we pushed out in our social media a couple months ago. In fact, Val, if you bug me, I will dig that article out. We can send it out to the group.
Okay.
I do not live with dyslexia, but I can tell you that the research that I've read is that dyslexia-friendly fonts aren't necessarily as helpful as people think they are going to be to people who live with dyslexia. And I don't know if there's anyone on the call who lives with dyslexia that could speak to that, but that is what I'm reading in research.
I don't have dyslexia, but I can add a comment that might help. This is Charles.
Sure. Okay.
While the ability to change the typeface itself can be valuable to some people, it's only one of many factors of how text appears on a screen that may not solve other problems related to dyslexia. For example, alignment is far more important than the typeface itself.
Good to know. Thanks, Charles. Charles has been a guest on this meetup, so it's nice that he's back. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? It is an overwhelmingly large disability category. It really is.
Hi, this is Patricia. I have a question. Do you, what about audio description and sign language? I think, you know, something can be all accessible, but the trouble is if it all the accessibility tools are together, it might be, you know, a confusion for people who needs things to be plainer, and, you know, people who have deficits of attention and this kind of thing. How can we solve that? Be accessible to all, but, you know, not to exclude anyone.
That's a really good question. Thanks for asking that. When you delve into digital accessibility, especially in the early days when you're first learning it, it can seem really overwhelming. But I think that one lesson that we've learned here at WeCo, that it's about offering people choices and giving people the option to take in information in a way that works for them when possible. But the backdrop, I think, of digital accessibility really is simplicity and design. White space works for many people with or without disabilities. Simple, clear language works well for people, whether they live with disabilities or not. And I think that it's really approaching accessibility from that standpoint of universal simplicity or universal design that is what really works. Now, I know that there are people in this room tonight who have worked on large accessibility projects, and I am wondering if anyone would speak up and share what they think in answer to this question. How do we not overwhelm people with all the accessibility work we're doing? I'm wondering if I can call on somebody from the WeCo team. Sue Ann? You can shoot me tomorrow for calling on you. Okay. Are there any other questions?
We do have one that just came up. Actually two. First, Sally's wondering, in what way is alignment helpful, and what alignment might be best for dyslexia?
Charles, would you like to take that one since you provided the detail?
Sure. One of the aspects of this is also white space or breathing room. So line height is also as important as the alignment. But left aligned text for left aligned reading languages like English are far easier for everyone to consume based on the energy that it takes for the human eye to track from the end of one line to the beginning of the next line. So things that are center aligned are very difficult because they require extra energy, and that extra energy can also be cognitive. But particularly with dyslexia, there's this thing called the river effect, where if you have full justified text, software tries to space out words so that the left and the right end meet the end of a perceived column, but the space between the words ends up very awkward. And when that spans several lines vertically, it can create awkward white spaces that run through the text. And the existence of that river can be pretty overwhelming and cause someone to reread the entire content.
Wow.
So I don't have dyslexia, but that I still experience that when I see text in that justified setting. It can be hard to read. The second question that we had was from Hillary. She's wondering if there's good strategy for communicating absence of memory to colleagues. She said, I request written out procedures, but critical details are routinely omitted. I am also very literal and expect the procedures to accurately articulate exactly what to do. Not having this type of accommodation is incredibly frustrating. So she's wondering if there's a good way to communicate that with people you work with.
Lynda, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. I too suffer with some memory issues given with my disability. And I find that the best policy is to be honest with your coworkers and explain what's going on and explain why you need the accommodation and why it will help you and all the other things that you can get done once you have this accommodation. And you'll be a much better asset to the company if they're willing to help you.
I would add to that should be a formal disability accommodation.
Yes.
And, we at WeCo, we struggle sometimes with, because almost everybody at WeCo lives with a disability, that it's so normal that we forget sometimes that we have to do a formal accommodation because we're just used to it. But it's if it is that important and vital to you getting your work done, it needs to go through a formal accommodation process. And then it can be monitored and modified as you need it.
She did follow up and say her supervisor is fully supportive, but it's her colleagues that are not great about it.
Well, in our company, that would be something that would warrant disciplinary action for the coworkers. So that really needs to be followed up with leadership.
There was a comment earlier too. Is it Booten Jones had said that he doesn't talk about learning disability at work because doesn't need accommodations and also doesn't want to be viewed as having a disadvantage that might prevent getting a promotion.
I hear that. I do. I know that the first time I came out in the workplace, I was actually a sales development banker for Norwest Bank. And I was having difficulty with my medication. I had actually been misdiagnosed as bipolar and I was not. And I was on some medication that was not very helpful. And I had an outburst in a meeting and my boss was very understanding, but the middle manager that I worked for actually got very abusive after I revealed my disability. And it got to the point that human resources had to step in and they did help. But I understand that, I know that my chances at promotion and everything really changed. How I was viewed really changed. And I finally, that's when I decided that I needed to move on to a different organization because I had this past of having a disability that management knew about. I really hope that is changing. I know that it is not changing as fast as I personally would like it to. That is part of the reason why I founded a company where people could live with disabilities and be open about them. But I think it is really important for people who live with cognitive disabilities that need workplace accommodation to follow up with those and to use them and to hold companies accountable for accommodating their disability and to not hide it. I mean, it's a personal choice. And of course, if you've heard me speak, you know how open I am about mine, but I think it's important because that's how we change things.
Carrie is wondering if there's a resource for adults who live with cognitive disabilities to learn about the kinds of accommodations and support that they might be entitled to. Anything you're aware of?
Not off the top of my head, but our operations director, Kelly Ryan, probably does. So Val, if I can ask you to make a note of that, we can follow up with all the members and see what Kelly has for those resources. She does that every day for her job, so.
There were two questions that were presented a while ago that haven't been answered, and one was an example of someone wanted to know the example of a troubling image, and also someone asked if there's ever testing with people that have a cognitive disability and another kind of disability, and we do that all the time at WeCo. A lot of our testers have more than one disability, sometimes cognitive along with a physical disability.
It is a skill set that we fill on our team of remote usability testers. We need to have testers that live with cognitive disabilities. And I'm sorry, Maureen, what was the other one?
Someone asked for an example of an overwhelming website.
Oh, okay.
And I think we can. You said you were going to find one, but I don't know if we want to do that now, or if we'll send out a link.
I will tell you what I was going to send out, and I'm sorry to pick on them, but it's ada.gov. I figure they're fair game because we pay for them, and they're in a reshape of their website. So if it's possible that the main page doesn't look like that anymore, it used to be one of the most overwhelming websites that many of us have ever encountered. But it's if you go there and it seems like it's a pretty peaceful page, we can send out. I've got a screenshot. We'll send it out to the membership. It's just a classic example of using a website as a filing cabinet, you know, and not having intuitive design. It is visually overwhelming. Screen reader users have told me it's overwhelming to them. So yes, ada.gov. Any other questions? Well, I hope that tonight made you feel maybe just a little bit uncomfortable. And I hope it made you understand that discomfort is okay, because that's how we grow. I hope that Lynda and I being able to share a little bit about what our day-to-day experience is like gave you a little bit of insight into how to develop successfully for users that live with cognitive disabilities. This is really just scratching the surface. Tonight was just designed to get you interested, to make you think. It's really quite a learning process. So we hope that this helped facilitate that. Val, I'll just share the screen again and you can take us out.
I will say too, I will do, there were a couple of resources that were posted earlier in the chat. I will pull the links to those and we can send those out with the couple of other things that we're going to follow up with everyone on. So that way we're sharing all of those resources with everybody. So the next, I think we touched on this at the beginning, but the next meetup will be November 28th, the Monday after Thanksgiving. And we'll be having Marcia Schwanke from the Southwest, or sorry, I think it's the Southeast. I probably typed that wrong, but the ADA Center, she's going to be talking about depuzzling digital access. And I am meeting with her tomorrow to get details on what that'll be. So there'll be a better explanation on the meetup group once I meet with her tomorrow. And there'll be a registration link there as well. And there's the link to the meetup where we have our past recordings, resources, and you can discuss anything you'd like to on that page. In order to find the recordings and the links, you just go from the main page on meetup.org. You go to the events tab and select past events, and then you can scroll down to the discussion with the recording link. We'll have that updated, I'd say within a week or two. We have to make sure that the captions are corrected and that everything is good with the recording. So you'll be able to find it there. And another thank you to our sponsors of United Health Group and WeCo for allowing us to have this meetup. So thank you everybody for joining us.
Yes, thank you. It was a beautiful night, and it was at least in Minneapolis. So it was great to see a lot of Minneapolis people here. I wanted to say thank you to Charles for being here and for offering information as well. And Maureen Pranghofer as well. Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.